Evening hours at IKIM FM. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to the dear listeners of IKIM FM. Welcome to a brand new season of Man and Nature. I'm your host Patricia Afrina, and Alhamdulillah, in this time, in this show, I'm given the opportunity to host such a great person, the backbone of this show. I welcome to the studio Dr. Shaikh Muhammad Saifuddeen bin Shaikh Muhammad Salleh, the Director of Research at Research Management Unit RMU at IKIM. Assalamualaikum, Doctor.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Patricia, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Doctor. And how about you, Doctor?
Alhamdulillah, we are coming towards the end of Ramadan,
Yes.
and I'm sure that everybody is looking forward to Eid al-Fitri, but I hope that we can also ensure that we take full advantage of the last days of Ramadan to reap the benefits from Allah SWT.
Yes, Doctor. And Alhamdulillah, it is such a pleasure to have you in the studio today. And honestly, for the first episode of this season, Doctor, I am excited to listen to your sharing of the show. But before we go into the topic of today's episode, could you first give us an overview of our program, Man and Nature, and what can our listeners expect from this fifth season?
Right. Thank you, Patricia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon, especially to our listeners who are listening or tuning in to IKIM FM this Sunday. Man and Nature, I think for those who have been following IKIM FM from the very beginning would certainly know that the program started in 2020.
2020.
During the time of the MCO, the Movement Control Order, when the pandemic started. Initially, when the program began, the main contributor to the program was Emeritus Professor Dr. Azizah binti Baharudin, the former Director General of IKIM. And I started to be involved in the program in mid-2021. Alternating between myself and also Emeritus Professor Dr. Azizan, before taking over entirely in 2022. And every season, what we do is that we try to bring a theme for discussion in this program. And last year, our focus was on climate change and environmental degradation. So for this year, inshallah, Man and Nature, which will be airing for the next 13 weeks, including this week, we will focus on the issue of biodiversity. So I think this is something that we need to really give our attention to, because we are part of the natural world. And if we fail to look after biodiversity, then at the end of the day, mankind will be the ones who are affected. So I think it's important that we highlight this issue for discussion, and also to look at what Islam says with regards to biodiversity.
And that's very interesting, because that is the topic of today's episode, the first episode, which is biodiversity for use, not abuse. That's very catchy. I really like to hear more about that. So to start off our discussion for today, when we usually talk about biodiversity, Doctor, we generally think about it, we will relate it to flora and fauna, but I'm sure there are actually more on it. So perhaps, can you share with us what is biodiversity?
Right. You're not wrong, actually, Patricia. When people say biodiversity, many will think about flora and fauna. As a person who does research, I think I like to start things off with definitions, so that we can really discuss this issue from the right perspective. So the term biodiversity is actually the combination of two words, which are biological and diversity. So in other words, it's short for biological diversity. People today use the word biodiversity quite a lot, and the word refers to the variety of life on this planet at all its levels, from genes to ecosystems, and biodiversity can also encompass the ecological and cultural processes that sustain life. And when we talk about biodiversity, it includes not only species we consider rare, because sometimes when people talk about biodiversity, they tend to talk about rare species. It's
Yes.
not just that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not also just about threatened species. It's also not about endangered species per se. So it's actually encompassing all life on Earth.
The general as a whole.
Yes, that's
Mm-hmm.
correct. Biodiversity includes every living thing from humans. Don't forget ourselves. We are also part of biodiversity. To organisms, whether we can see the organisms or otherwise. We can biodiversity includes organisms like microbes, fungi, and
Mm-hmm.
also invertebrates. So anything that is living on this planet, be they flora, be they fauna, be they microbes, they are part of biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, from my reading, I found that some scholars actually include humans and human cultural diversity as part of biodiversity. So, what this means is that in this regard, the term often used from this perspective is biocultural diversity to describe the dynamic and also continually evolving and interconnected nature of people and place, and the notion that social and biological dimensions are interrelated.
That's interesting.
So this is to me something that is interesting that I hope to also highlight in the coming episodes, because this goes beyond the realm of the common understanding of biodiversity. The concept of biocultural diversity recognizes that human use, knowledge, and beliefs influence and in turn are influenced by the ecological systems of which human communities are a part of. I think this can be seen especially when we talk about indigenous knowledge
Mm-hmm.
or perhaps traditional knowledge, where if you look at, for example, the Orang Asli community or the Malay community of the past, they live with nature. They look at nature and they use nature to survive.
Yes.
So this is something that I think we have to acknowledge and also appreciate, that nature influences the way we live, and in turn we actually impact nature. The way we live impact nature.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that is, I think, is part of the balance of the natural world. Um, I think this relationship makes all of biodiversity, including the species, the land, the ocean, and also the cultural links to the places where we live, whether we live, whether where we are now, or we are talking about distant lands. They are important to our well-being, as as they all play a role in maintaining a diverse and healthy planet. So, in many aspects, we can say that biodiversity is actually a multidisciplinary field. If you want to study biodiversity, we can look at biodiversity from the many branches of science. But not only that, we can also look at biodiversity from the perspective of the humanities and also the social sciences. So, in a nutshell, if we want to talk about biodiversity, we're talking about the variety of life that can be found on this planet.
Mm-hmm. And talking about the social science, just now you mentioned, I mean, listening to your sharing that we actually play a big role in this biodiversity. As you say just now, that everything that we do will have impact, sort of like impact onto the biodiversity, and this sort of like display the relationship between the nature and also with human. So can you share with us what is the importance of biodiversity to mankind?
Right, thank you, Patricia. Ladies and gentlemen who's listening at this point, at this moment, I think we cannot deny the fact that biodiversity is actually an important aspect in our life. We actually need to value biodiversity for many reasons. Some may be utilitarian in nature, some may be intrinsic in nature. This means that we value biodiversity for both for what it provides to humans and for the value that it has in its own right. When we talk about utilitarian, it's quite a mouthful to pronounce the word. Utilitarian, what this means is actually it values the many basic needs that we obtain from biodiversity. For example, food.
Mm-hmm.
For example, fuel, shelter, and also medicine. Don't forget that we can get a lot of natural medicines from the forests. And we must realize the fact that the ecosystems provide crucial services that we may not realize actually, because perhaps in this modern day we are not that observant. Services provided by nature or services provided by biodiversity include pollination, and then seed dispersal, climate regulation, water purification, nutrient cycling, carbon absorption, control of agricultural pests. Where we're talking about ecological balance. So all these are some of the important and crucial services provided by biodiversity to us in order for us to survive. Not only just for us to get food and shelter and fuel, but without us realizing it, there are crucial services provided by the natural world so that mankind can survive on this planet. Now, biodiversity also holds value for potential benefits not yet recognized, such as new medicines and also other possible unknown services. Our knowledge regarding the natural world is, probably just at the tip of the iceberg. There are many more things that we are still not privy of. Biodiversity also has cultural value to humans. For spiritual or religious reasons, for example. The intrinsic value of biodiversity refers to its inherent worth, which is independent of its values to anyone or anything else. And I think finally, for the value of biodiversity can also be understood through the lens of the relationships we form and strive for for each other and the rest of nature. I think this is very much in line with the Islamic concept of the relationship between man and nature. We have our relationship between man and Allah SWT.
Yes.
We have the relationship amongst mankind. But let us not forget the third dimension, which is the relationship between man and nature, something that we really need to look after so that we can fulfill our obligation as the khalifah or vicegerent or representative of Allah on this planet. So these relational values are part of our individual and collective responsibility. And I think this is some of the importance that biodiversity have on mankind.
And I would like to bring forward about the relationship between man and nature, right, Doctor?
Yeah.
Because as for now, we could see that, as you mentioned, that the nature give us service to survive, to live in this world. However, we could see that today's not every person in this world have that awareness that actually we abusing the nature, the resources that were given to us. So in talking about that, could you share us some of your insight or of your view, of your perspective on the people's awareness towards the usage of nature?
Well, I think you have a very valid point. I think some of us, I wouldn't say all, but some of us actually think that we live a part of nature, meaning we are not being one part of nature, a part of nature. We are a part, separate,
Two separate,
separate.
Identity.
Yes, same spelling but different ways of spelling the words.
Yes.
One is a part and the other is a part. So when we have that mentality that we are not part of nature, then we tend to have we have this tendency to abuse or misuse or overuse. Overconsumption. I think that is one of the roots of the problems that we face today, which results in environmental degradation, which results in climate change that we are seeing today.
Yes.
And even today, still there are some people saying that climate change is a myth.
Yes. That's surprisingly.
That's the problem, because we deny there is a problem. So I think part of the way to solve the problem is to actually admit that there is a problem in the first place. And whether we want to admit it or not, the root of the problem is ourselves. Overconsumption is really one very big problem today in the age of commercialization, where we are enticed to buy things that we don't need. At the end of the day, we tend to throw away, and this leads to much wastage. And we know that waste management is not something that is easy to handle, and this definitely impacts on the environment and subsequently the rich biodiversity that we have. So this is something that is very much regrettable. But again, we can easily speak on this, but the challenge is to get people to change the way we do things, the way we live. We are so much comfortable with using so much energy, which leads to wastage. Alhamdulillah, in Malaysia, we are blessed with plentiful water. And again, because of this, we tend to waste our clean water. And this is something that can lead to a lot of problems in the future. So I think, there is a lot of discussion on biodiversity when it comes to the threat of loss of biodiversity, primarily because of our own actions, which results in abuse of the natural world. And this actually we can trace back to the Industrial Revolution, when humans have come to dominate the planet, quote unquote, and causing a lot of changes to the ecosystem. Unfortunately also leading to massive loss of biodiversity across the planet. And that's why I think some people today are referring to the age that we live in as the age of Anthropocene, where humans dominate the planet. So while we know that the Earth has always experienced changes, there have always been extinctions in the past. Today, the rate of extinction is happening at an unprecedented pace. We are losing a lot of species every day. Every day. And some insects are on the brink of extinction. Just imagine, they are pollination agents. If we lose some of these insects, definitely pollination will not take place, and this definitely will impact on the ecosystem, and subsequently this will impact the food supply to mankind as well. And we have to give a very serious thought on this, otherwise there will be a lot of major threats to biodiversity, which results in habitat loss, fragmentation, unsustainable resource use, introduction of invasive species, for example. I mean, there was in the news recently about invasive species in our rivers.
The ikan bandaraya.
Exactly.
Yes.
And this leads to the loss of the species that are in the river itself. So this is something that we have to give very serious attention to. I mean, sometimes of course we keep the fish for a certain reason in the aquarium, but when the fish gets too big, many people just throw the fish into the drains, which lead to the river.
Yes.
And without we realizing it, it impacts on the ecosystem of the river. So again, I think the threats, the problems are there. There are many studies done by researchers on threats on biodiversity, but I think what is important is to communicate these findings to the layperson, to the community, so that we can understand that the problem is there, and that the root of the problem is ourselves, and that we are the ones who have to take action by changing the way we live, by changing our priorities, by optimizing the use of energy, water, so that we can play a role in ensuring that we use the biodiversity resources in a very responsible manner, not abusing it, not misusing it, and not overusing it.
And that's very interesting, talking about that, admitting that there's a problem in the first place. Because I've heard before that, especially in the developed countries, in the first world countries, they don't feel much impact on it. But for the poor countries, for the third world countries, they feel the impact, especially on the climate change, where you can see they're experiencing drought, and in which have turned affecting the supply food chain, where they find it difficult to find food. And it's very sad to know that some people are denying that there is a problem at the first place. So in your opinion, is it too late to halt the loss of biodiversity, and what can we do as members of the society and to help to promote about that?
I think it's interesting. Before I answer that question, I think it's interesting what you mentioned just now regarding some of those in the developed world who do not feel the impact of climate change. I think they are starting to feel the impact already. I mean, we are talking about climate change. It's not just about droughts. It's also the change in weather patterns,
Yes.
the change in precipitation. So these are impacting all parts of the world, not just a certain area. So that's why we see that there are already awareness in developed countries as well, that there is a need to take action.
Mm-hmm.
Those who deny climate change, I believe, are those who have certain interests, capitalistic interests.
Mm-hmm.
They want to keep on, promoting consumerism, and also promoting, excessive use of energy and resources, because there's money in that. And they perhaps want to gain something from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why this group of people who have certain interests want to protect their interests, and that's why they deny the existence of climate change, even to the extent of saying that, in spite of the um, scientific proofs, they say that climate change is a myth. Now,
Mm-hmm.
going back to your question, can we halt the loss of biodiversity? Well, the thing is, Patricia, the reality is that it is within our power to change our actions. If we want to change, we will change. And if we change, we can ensure that biodiversity is sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to ensure the survival of species, if we want to ensure the health and integrity of the ecological systems, uh, each of us actually play a very important role. We can play a role that can impact the ecosystem positively or negatively.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we want to positively impact the ecosystem, definitely we have to make certain changes. And it begins with ourselves. Some people say, "Oh, what difference does one person make?"
Yes.
The thing is, if every person say that,
Mm-hmm.
then definitely nothing will change. So if we want to change, we have to start with ourselves, and then our family.
We can actually influence other people. Starting from
Exactly,
one people can influence two people, and then two people can influence four people.
exactly.
Right?
It's
Mm-hmm.
a snowball effect.
Yes.
So we start with ourselves, our family, our community, and hopefully the scale will increase.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't start, definitely nothing will happen.
Happen.
We see that there are many conservation efforts taking place in the last decades. There are many initiatives such as creating national parks, creating wildlife refuge, and then having marine protected areas. All these actually help towards conserving the rich biodiversity that we have. Malaysia is one of the richest country in terms of biodiversity. So
Yes.
let's not make our let's not lose our richness in biodiversity. So when protecting habitat is not enough, we have other types of conservation, such as restoration, reintroduction, control of invasive species. We talked about that just now.
Mm-hmm.
Reforestation, planting trees.
Yes.
All this will help. Even if we plant a tree in our garden, that can help.
Mm-hmm.
So don't say that we don't have any impact. What we do does give impact, and the more people that we get on board to be on our side, then inshallah I believe we can work towards shaping a better future in terms of ensuring that we use biodiversity in a responsible manner.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is quite out of topic a bit, but I would like to go back to just now you talk about the industrial revolution, right? Um, there's a issue of where people raise that how could we modernize our life if we're not using if we're not using the nature to our own advantage. So in your opinion, can the revolution of the industry and also the I would say the conservation of biodiversity be aligned next to each other?
Well, the thing is, when the Industrial Revolution started, people did not think about what impact it has on biodiversity and the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
So they just kept on cutting down forests, in a very unsustainable manner. That's why if you look at the concept of sustainability, it started in Germany, or rather the term was coined in the 19th century.
19th century.
Because there was in Germany they started to have this awareness that we cannot keep on cutting down trees forever, or we lose our forests. So that's why during that time they started to introduce the concept of forest sustainability, because awareness already began in Germany at that time. So when we come into the 20th century, then we see that the impact of industrialization has on the climate. We see increase in our temperature. Today we can feel the heat. We see that sometimes there are places with heavy rainfall because of the disruption in the climate pattern, in the weather pattern. So the impacts, we are already beginning to feel the impacts, and if we do not do anything, then all this will be irreversible. That's why we have to start from now. We can, what has happened in the past is something that we should take as lessons for us today, so that we do not repeat these mistakes and subsequently impacting our future generations. We have to remember that the environment is actually not us, not for us per se, but it's actually a responsibility given to us by our future generation. This is something that we have to look after for the sake of our future generation. We do not want our children, our grandchildren to live in a world where there is scarcity in terms of water. There is widespread pollution. Living in a place where temperature is unbearable. So this is something that we should keep in mind, so that we make the right moves today, take the necessary actions to ensure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the yesteryears.
So, Doctor, what is the view of Islam on biodiversity?
Right. I think if you want to speak about the view of Islam with regards to biodiversity, we can have a few episodes on this. But as perhaps as an appetizer for future episodes, I think we understand that Islam has already taught us that life on Earth is made up of a complex set of interrelated ecosystems, which Allah SWT wants us to maintain in a natural balance. That's why if you look in the Quran, there are many verses that highlight the importance of mizan, or balance. For example, if you were to think about it, I mentioned about this earlier, if there were no pollinating insects on Earth, for example, bees, butterflies, there would not be any fruits. So imagine when there are no fruits, then we will not be able to enjoy fruits from plants. And without plants that provide nectar and pollen, there would be no food to sustain the bees. And bees and plants are dependent upon each other. So many ecosystems rely on a wide variety of plants and animals interacting with one another, like bees and plants. And this is what we call biodiversity. This is one example of biodiversity. And in the Quran, if you look at the Quran, there are many verses that actually mention about bees and also plants. So I believe that is one way of Allah SWT telling us the importance of bees and plants in our lives. And the Quran also, like I said, mentioned about mizan a lot. For example, in Surah Ar-Rahman, verses 7 to 9, in which Allah SWT says to the effect that, as for the sky, He raised it high and set the balance of justice, so that you do not defraud the scales, weigh with justice, and do not give short measure. Now, for me, there are many ways to look at this verse, but for me, if you were to relate these three verses to biodiversity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually ordaining us to respect the balance that He has created and acknowledge its importance for our very own existence. He also instructs us to maintain this balance. What we take from this earth with one hand, we must return with the other. So in other words, it is critical for us to ensure that we use biodiversity, which is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a responsible manner. I think I've been saying this a few times already in this episode. And also equally important is for us not to abuse biodiversity, because this can actually lead to fasad or destruction, and this is something that we should avoid. So in short, I think Islam emphasizes the importance of biodiversity, and also the importance of mankind to play the role of khalifah responsibly in order to ensure that we do not create destruction or fasad on this planet.
Yes. And as we are reaching the end of this conversation, Doctor, what can we conclude from this topic?
Right. There are actually many aspects of biodiversity that we can actually discuss. And today's discussion is perhaps the tip of the iceberg. And inshallah, in the coming episodes, we will discuss further on the variety of issues, some of which we have mentioned briefly today. Inshallah, we will also have special guests that will enlighten us on these topics. And what I hope is that our discussions will lead to increased awareness for us and also for our listeners towards the betterment of the world. We have to appreciate the beauty of the world that Allah SWT has created for us.
Yes.
For Muslims, I think looking after biodiversity is a very big responsibility that Allah has given to us as Khalifah. And this will, inshallah, if we do this task successfully, inshallah, I believe this will increase our piety towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also forges taqarrub, closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within ourselves. Perhaps as a conclusion, I would like to leave our listeners with this food for thought. Perhaps also as a motivation for us to look after our biodiversity. If the world or dunya is created with such a diverse beauty, just imagine how Jannah would look like. So I think this is a motivation for us, to look after the beauty that Allah has given us on this world, because that is actually a small glimpse of what Jannah looks like. And if we can use this as motivation, inshallah, I think we can play our role as Khalifah on this world in a very responsible and appropriate manner, inshallah.
Inshallah. And dear listeners, it is important to remember that we have to appreciate the biodiversity not only for its natural beauty but also for the vital services it provides. So just like as Dr. mentioned just now, such as the pollination and also climate regulation. So the preservation of biodiversity is more than just an ethical necessity. It is a question of survival. So by maintaining biodiversity, we ensure our own and future generations' well-being. It is time for us to acknowledge the gravity of the issue and take action. And with that being said, I would like to thank Dr. Shaikh for his insight onto this topic, biodiversity for use, not abuse. And we hope that today's sharing will be beneficial to those who are listening to us either through radio or through online. And again, Doctor, thank you for being with us in the studio. Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And dear listeners, if you miss any part of the show or would like to watch it again, you can watch it through our Facebook, facebook.com/IKIMFM, and through our YouTube, youtube.com@ikimfm.my. And we hope that you'll be tuning to us next week for more sharing from Dr. Shaikh. So stay tuned to IKIM FM, inspirasi utama anda.